Daniel Sempere Pico. Thank you for being here today, sir.
Thank you for having me. Very well pronounced. Nailed it.
Yeah. Um, we just talked offline before this how I was going to have no shot at pronouncing his name, so appreciate
Yeah.
that.
BTC
uh,
Gandalf is so much easier and cooler.
that really is, yeah. I should have mentioned that. Probably better known as Bitcoin Gandalf on Twitter until somewhat recently. Let me start here. I know you've lived all over the world. You work for yourself and you're a Bitcoiner. You haven't read The Sovereign Individual, have you?
I tried once, like when I first got into Bitcoin, that was the book that was sort of bandied about as like,
Yeah.
one of the books to read. And I was listening to it on Audible, but I think I just got bored.
Yeah, you got
It's
to kind of
quite.
work your way through it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've now seen the physical book, and it is quite a fat, chunky thing, right?
It is.
Um,
It is.
but
It
I
can be
know
a
the
grind.
sort of like premise that we're like
Yeah.
going to an information age and like there's going to be no countries and no, I don't know if
Yes.
it like specifically says that, but like you can live anywhere and work online and you know
Yep.
everyone will be like a solopreneur kind of thing. Is that roughly
Yes, you
what it's
basically
about?
are the sovereign individual.
Ah,
That's
I
why I
like it.
asked you about it. He's also got in there. He predicts, you know, 20 something years before Bitcoin that there will be a digital currency that no one, no country owns specifically, and that's how you earn over the internet and all this stuff. So he kind of foresaw that trend coming. So yeah, it's looks to be your framework for life. So I was wondering if you had
I need to
read
read
that and
it because I'm
implemented it.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some good nuggets in there, like that I'm missing from the 3 line summary.
that's right. Um, why don't we start with where you've lived? Because I know you're from Spain, right? You lived in Portugal, you've lived in the UK, you've lived in Hong Kong most of your life, and now you're in Dubai. So give us the backstory on how you ended up all over the world.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I was born in Spain. My whole family uh, up from me, so like parents, uncles, cousins, grandparents, etc. They're all Spanish. They all live in Spain. I don't think any of my other relatives have left Spain. Um, and so I was born there, but my parents had already at the time left Spain to live in Portugal,
Mm-hmm.
which for people that don't know the geography, they're very close together. So my parents went back to Spain to have me, and then 7 days later we hopped on a plane and went back to Portugal. And
Gotcha.
I've never lived in Spain. I think I
Oh,
saw
okay.
a Naval tweet that said something along the lines. It was something about uh, like how quickly you leave your hometown, or like your level of intelligence is directly correlated to like when you
Yeah.
leave, or something about leaving your
It's an
hometown,
IQ
basically.
test, or
Isn't it okay
essentially.
there? I mean, I guess if it depends where you live, right? If you live in New York, it's like you know hard to upgrade, so to speak.
Yep.
But I understand, like if you live in a small town, you want to go somewhere a bit, yeah, just a bit more worldly. But yeah, I never got to live in Spain. I lived in Portugal for 2 years, then I lived in Brazil, and then I moved to Hong Kong. So I moved to Hong Kong when I
Wow.
was 8 years old, and that was all
Gotcha.
because of my dad's job. My dad worked for a Spanish manufacturing company, and so we lived in kind of like wherever they would open a factory, they would send my dad there, and he worked for the same company for like 42 years. Started off like my parents didn't finish school. Uh, I think my dad finished a uni degree studying by night, like when he was a bit older, but like from
Wow.
age, I think 14 or something, he was working at this company loading trucks, and then he became like a salesperson, and then he became like the head of like open. Yeah, he became a sort of general manager that would go and open factories in different places. So that's why he was in Portugal. That's why he was in Brazil, and that's why we moved to Hong Kong because the company was opening a factory in China.
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah,
Um,
sorry. So that's me as a sort of a kid. So that's my parents moving us around.
mhm.
I lived in Hong Kong for 25 years. So I lived in Hong Kong for 25 years. One of my friends made fun of me because they were like, they added up the all the years I said of places I'd lived, and it added up to 40, but I'm 37. That's because for 3 of those years I was studying at university in the UK. So and also like, but Hong Kong was like I lived in Hong Kong as well. So I was going back and
Yeah.
forth on holidays. I'd be back home in Hong Kong. During term time, I'd be in the UK. So I counted those years as living in both places. But yeah, so
Right.
I lived in the UK for 3 years. Then I went back to Hong Kong after university and stayed there until 2021, when my wife and I left Hong Kong and decided to move to Scotland, where she's from.
Gotcha.
After a year, so the thing is, like, I got into Bitcoin between deciding to move to Scotland and actually leaving Hong Kong to go there. I got into Bitcoin, and I didn't consider the tax implications of that. So 11, and I was also selling a business. I was potentially selling a business in Hong Kong as well. So we moved to Isle of Man at some point after less than a year in Scotland. We were planning to settle there long term because it was just like, it was close to the UK, which is why we moved. We moved to the UK to be close to my wife's family. So it was still close to the UK, but obviously much better tax
Right.
treatment. And then my wife especially couldn't quite settle there. I was quite happy because I work and spend time with my family. I don't really do anything else. And the Isle of Man's beautiful, lots of greenery and hikes. It is cold and windy, but I didn't mind that so much. But yeah, she wanted to move somewhere else. So we actually considered moving back to Hong Kong. But my sister and her family moved to Dubai, and my mum moved to Dubai as well. So we also considered Dubai. My wife has some friends here. We took the kids, visited both places, and we just felt Dubai was a lot more family friendly than Hong Kong. It just has a lot more to offer if you have a family here. Real estate is also a lot cheaper here than it is in Hong Kong.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you specifically about Dubai because I've never been there. I don't know anyone who lives there. Tell me what it's like.
So I'll kick this off by saying, like, a lot of people have this image of Dubai that is, it's kind of like, you know, the takes you hear about Bitcoin that's like, it's only used by criminals and money launderers and whatever. There's that version of Dubai, which is like, it's all just like, you know, Instagram models, and like it has no culture and it's superficial and it's just like about being rich and showing off or whatever, or like, you know, it's run by slaves, or you can't say this or that because you go to jail, or, you know, it's a totalitarian dictatorship. So I mean, it's a city. You got to think about, Dubai has had, when people say it has no culture, right? Dubai's development has happened, like the equivalent development that would have happened, say, in the UK in like 300 years happened here in like 60, right? So Dubai's culture is just like, it's only 60 years old. There's not, I think when people think of culture, I think of like history and this, like, you know, houses, you know, 300-year-old houses and like all these things happen. Like there was nothing here. There was like literally probably just a few dozen desert dwelling villagers, right? Because it's just such a harsh environment. I think there was no, so I recently read a book called City of Gold. It's sort of like the history, half the book is sort of the history of this area, specifically focusing on Dubai. There was no water, there was no running water or electricity in Dubai until like the 1960s.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So sure, it might not have like a deep, rich culture that goes back hundreds of years, but the like what the guys have done here in terms of, you know, the ruling family, what they've done in terms of developing Dubai is incredible. And the way they've developed Dubai was, there was no one here. So the only way they can, you know, make Dubai what it is by making it attractive for people to come and live here. And it's been like that forever. I think in the late 1800s, they were trying to attract like Iranian traders and businessmen, and there was like a big pearl fishing industry, and then that went down the toilet in the 20s or something, and then eventually they found oil in the 40s or 50s, and that's sort of when they got, you know, they got a bit of money. But they knew that especially in Dubai doesn't have that much oil. Abu Dhabi has a lot of oil. So the United Arab Emirates is made up of 7 emirates. Dubai is one of them, and everyone just thinks, oh, everyone, you know, it's a rich place because they have lots of oil. They did have some oil, but they've basically pumped it all out of the ground. But what they did do is make sure that they invested that money into other things that would keep the city growing and keep money flowing in, so that they wouldn't just have to rely on the oil. And then when the money ran out, they have nothing. But yeah, Dubai is it's a strange city. It's not like New York or Hong Kong. New York and Hong Kong are very similar in some ways. Like, a very crowded. There's a lot of skyscrapers. Dubai is like a series of different sort of areas built in the middle of the desert, and you get everywhere by car, and it's all like, pretty much anywhere you go, you're driving down some crazy 7-lane motorway to get there. And there are areas with a lot of skyscrapers, but for me, living in Hong Kong, it doesn't feel like it's that built up. There's a lot more space here, so you can live in a house, for example. Obviously, there are apartments and stuff, but you can live in a house. Like in Hong Kong, if you want to live in a house, you probably have to pay like 30 or 40,000 US a month rent or something like that. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, maybe like at least 20, unless you like go out in the sticks and live in a village, literal village up in like the New Territories, where then maybe you're paying like at least 8,000 US. But if you want to live on Hong Kong Island in a house, it's at least like 20, 25K, but probably more.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if you're comparing to Hong Kong, I've been there a couple times. That's the craziest city to me. It feels like an alien planet, or it's like some from the future, where you look at the skyline and how quickly everything's moving, the transit, the boats, the trains, everything. It's just wild. It's very busy. I was there for 3 nights for my honeymoon, and it was awesome, but we were like ready to go after three nights. Yeah.
I mean, Hong Kong. The only place I've been to that's like it is New York, slightly. But New York feels huge compared to Hong Kong. Like, people complain about New York. Yeah, people complain about New York apartments being cramped and this and that. Like, go to Hong Kong, and it's like a completely different. Like, New York has big, like the avenues are huge roads. There's no roads like that in Hong Kong, pretty much. Like, not going through this, there might be like an elevated highway that's similar to an avenue, but there's no roads like that going through Hong Kong, or barely any. Like, it's all very, because it was, I guess it was just a lot of it still the way it was before there was a lot of cars around. Like, people used to take rickshaws up to the peak from the Star Ferry, right?
Yeah.
And Hong Kong's developed really quickly too, but it's just so cramped. So there's not, you can't, if you want, real estate is where people make money. So if you make the roads wider, that's less room for buildings, which means you make less money. The developers there's like 4 or 5 families that control the majority of industry there, and the real estate developer. They have like some form of transport, some form of ports business, some form of telecommunications, and some form of real estate development.
Wow.
And it's like 4 or 5 families. Yeah.
That's
crazy. And the majority of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. But going back to Dubai, like the things I found here, it's very family friendly. It's not what you think in terms of like it being some sort of totalitarian dictatorship where you can't, hold hands with your wife or whatever. Culturally, in some places or in some situations, it might not be like the right etiquette, but I see people kissing, holding hands all the time. Like the sort of stereotype that there's a lot of Instagram models here. There are a lot of people that, have plastic surgery and have their body parts out and at the mall, wearing skimpy clothes. And then there's other people who are covered up. And there's people who are wearing like traditional Emirati dress, and there's Westerners wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and it's mixed. And I've never felt like, when my wife and I first got here, it's like, oh, we can't hold hands on date night or whatever. It's not the case.
So is it like the Islamic culture there sort of puts up with the Western culture because they're bringing money in, or is that the general approach? How do you think those two worlds are managed?
I haven't I don't think I've met an Emirati person. At least I haven't. If I've met them, I didn't know they were Emirati. I always try, if I do speak to someone in a shop or whatever, I try to ask where they're from, especially if they seem Arabic, and they're always from somewhere else. Like, there's a lot of Egyptians here. There's a lot of Lebanese. There's a lot of people from other countries in the Middle East, but I don't think I've met an Emirati.
Gotcha.
But the majority of the population here is expat. It's some ridiculous figure, like 97% of the population is expat.
Wow.
The biggest nationality here is Indian.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So whilst it is like, their country, the majority of people here are not from here. Right. So you can't expect to attract people from other places and not be somewhat tolerant of their cultures, their beliefs, their everything.
Right.
Yeah. There's churches here. I think there's even a synagogue.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wanted to you had mentioned real estate in Hong Kong, and if I'm getting this right, that was your first business until four-ish years ago, right? So what was your real estate business like? I'm curious.
So yeah, when I left university, it was like 2011, and so the entire world was still like sort of reeling in after it was like the financial crisis aftermath, and I was obsessed with Warren Buffett when I was like a late teenager, and I wanted to be like an investment manager. I tried to get a job at Fidelity. I tried to get a job in finance, basically. I almost got into like the Fidelity graduate program. I interviewed at Bloomberg as like that was like my last ditch effort. It's like, if I can't go into an actual like asset management, I'll still do something in finance, but go for Bloomberg. Anyway, couldn't get any job. So I ended up just someone I played football with had a logistics company, and they're like, come help us do this thing. So I had actually done an internship in a logistics company with someone I played football with. This is someone different though, who said, we have a job. I went and interviewed, and I'd been unemployed out of university for 6 months, living with my mom. I was like, I'll just take this job, right? I did that for a year, and then I was about to switch jobs to another logistics company, and the day before my interview or something, just through a family connection, someone that my mom knew had started a real estate brokerage in Hong Kong. And so they're like, I went and spoke to him. They were taking new agents, and I was like, this sounds a lot better than logistics. So I'll go try that. The bit I liked about it was that I could be like a freelance agent and just take commission only. But I felt like my income, it was, sort of unlimited. The thing I didn't like about a salary job is that no matter how hard I worked, I was still making the same salary. And I remember in the job interview, I got asked, the job interview for this logistics role that I was going to take, I got asked, like, if, let's say you work really hard and you've done a really good job, but the company has had a bad year, so you don't get a bonus. Would you be okay with that? And I was like, sure, yeah, I'm a team player. I understand if the company, but inside I was like, hell no.
Yeah.
Right. So, the real estate thing seemed a lot better because it's like, I take home what I kill. And so I took that. And then 3 years into it, I'd grown a team in that company of like 12 agents. And I think I was 28 or 29. I wanted to cut the size of my team down from like 12 to 5, just because I was like, I can get the top performing. If I can spend more time with the top performing person, I can get them to double their revenue more so than I can get the person, the like bottom 7 people who are making $0 and suck to make some money, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But they're sort of venture backed. They wanted to grow. Headcount was one of the like growth metrics. And so I was just like, okay, I'm just going to go off and I had a plan to do my own thing, but I was like, I've only worked at one real estate agency, so let me go work at another place to see what that's like. And then eventually that, I feel like with at least 2 places, I'll have enough experience and understanding of like how it all works to go and start my own thing. So I actually took a job at JLL.
Okay.
But so I was working in a startup where I was like, some of my colleagues became my best friends, moving to this like more corporate environment where I was in residential real estate. The residential team was kind of like tiny compared to the commercial and the asset management team that they had. It was like an afterthought. And then I also I saw the way they did business, And I was like, you guys are going to get, like, you're not going to exist in a year if you keep going this way. Because I've just come from the startup that's doing things complete. This is at a time, remember, well, this is at a time in like 2016, at least in Hong Kong, like an online real estate agency was like, oh my God, it's so advanced, right? You know, you can go to a website and just like click buttons and find the properties and whatever. So no one else was really doing that. So yeah, and I saw the way the startup was doing it, and I saw the way JLL was doing things, and I was like, you guys are going to die. I had also started doing a YouTube show called Ask DSP, where I would like I became like I built a brand within my network. I was the real estate guy, so people would always ask my friends or people I went to school with or whatever would be messaging me all the time, asking me questions about my landlord's trying to renew the lease and they're trying to do this and trying to do that. So I would just I was like, I'm answering all these questions. And it's all often the same question over and over. So I just started taking the questions and answering them and recording them. And for a YouTube show I called Ask DSP.
Oh.
Right. And I remember my manager at JLL, I think I swore. I watched a lot of Gary Vee at the time. And so I think I kind of modeled him. And so I was swearing a lot in my videos. And she said, like, my manager messaged me. And this is something I was doing on my own time on the weekends at home. My friend was helping me film and edit and whatever. She was like, I love the videos, but we're going to have to like maybe get you dressed a bit nicer and stop swearing. And I was like, no. And I basically like quit over them trying to control what I did on the show and how I dressed on the show. And over the fact that I was like, okay, there's no point staying here because they're going to die. And they did actually, JLL ended up shutting down the residential department in Hong Kong. I don't know if it's opened again, but they shut it down. Yeah, so then that's when I just like was kind of like, okay, I guess I'm going to do my own thing now. So I started my own real estate brokerage. Essentially, I just went out as a solo broker, thinking naively that I could crush the venture-backed startup, and yeah, I did that for like just over 2 years. My mum quit her job and came to work with me towards like the back half of that. And then I was just like, I don't think a real estate agency basically only scales with people. And I was like, I don't want to build a business that requires me hiring loads of people to scale it. And I don't want to run around on my weekends and evenings showing apartments and doing viewings. So I was like, I need to do something else. And this is like in the process of starting the agency, I like try to build my own website. And so I remember like watching a WordPress, it's a WordPress tutorial on how to build a website. And that's, I was like, okay, you can code an app or you can make a website or whatever. And like millions of people can use it. And you don't need to hire, like you can basically, if you learn to code, you can maybe do it by yourself. And so I was like, okay, I need to do something on the internet. That's what sparked that sort of, well, I guess it was like a moment where I saw where I could go that was different to real estate, because real estate is literally, it's a lot of selling your time. Right. So that's where it all started. I ended up shutting down my agency, going back to the startup, and just serendipitously I met a real estate investor in Hong Kong, and an opportunity came up to buy a real estate brokerage and property management company. So I was like, okay, this is a company that had been like operating for 15 years or something, and the owner had moved on to other businesses. He was kind of neglecting it, and it was basically going bankrupt because the people working there didn't have a profit motive. They were just getting paid. The owner didn't care about it. So it was like basically a cigar butt, what Warren Buffett calls the cigar butt acquisition. It's like you can squeeze the last few puffs out of the cigar butt before you put it out. So we thought like, well, we got it at a super cheap price. Maybe it will take over for another 5 years or whatever, and the return will be amazing. And I thought that's a great way of still leveraging all my experience and knowledge and skills in real estate without having to be involved in day-to-day operations of the business. Because I was like, I'm not really enjoying doing real estate, so I can still make money, use that knowledge and that experience to manage the company. And then with the free time, I can learn to code. My plan was either like learn to code or I'm going to become a YouTuber or something. It was either like media or code. but I knew it was going to be the internet. And then my business partner and I got into a disagreement about the future of the company, and I ended up selling him my shares. And that's at the same time as when I left Hong Kong and got into Bitcoin and started tweeting. And then kind of here we are.
Well, Bitcoin can absolutely ruin your career, because if you're starting the Bitcoin Gandalf stuff on the side and just like reading, listening, learning about Bitcoin, and then you're like, wait, why do I do this job again?
It was coming up to the time where we'd had the business for a year. We'd let go of the employees we didn't want to keep. We'd hired new employees. We'd retrained them. We'd put in place systems, processes. There was no point in investing more money into the business. It was impossible to grow it. So it was kind of like put in place a couple of employees you can take care of day to day. My business partner and I would have to spend a few hours a week at most just overseeing stuff. Because keep in mind, we worked on it full time for a year, turning it over, right? And I had been in real estate. He didn't have any agency experience, but he'd been an investor and owned properties. But anyway, we put in place everything, and then he kind of wanted to take it in a direction where he wanted to grow it. I basically, I told him a year in advance, like our plan was, my wife and I's plan was to leave Hong Kong. So I was like, that's plenty of time to put in place our plan to sort of automate the business and move on to other stuff. And then I literally went to in November 2020. I went to Scotland to get the keys for our house in the middle of COVID. I went to Scotland to get the keys for our house, and I came back, and he was like, I want to grow the business, and I'm going to try and, Anyway, we got that. Things turned nasty there, and I've sort of excluded from the business. And it was during that trip to Scotland that I listened to a podcast. I already owned Bitcoin from 2019. So I had a client in 2017 that told me about Bitcoin and Ethereum in like March 2017. And he was like a rich, successful guy. So I was kind of like, okay, he must know what he's talking about. And so I think I looked into it, and I was like, I probably read a BBC News article, and I was like, oh, it's a Ponzi. It has no intrinsic value. It's a bubble. Right, it's going to crash. And of course, 2018 came around, and I was like, see, it crashed. And I was like, I'm super smart. I knew what I was talking about, blah, 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 blah. And then I saw in 2019, when it went back up to 10K, I was like, okay, bubbles don't reinflate back to halfway to their, bubble high. So I was like, I had another friend who was also kept telling me to look into Bitcoin. So I think I bought some. I was like, if I buy some, I will then have skin in the game, and I'll be incentivized to study about it. That's when I bought the business. Anyway, the trip to Scotland was the first time since I bought the business where I had some time to like breathe. And I can't remember how. I just listened to a podcast, and then I had a 2-week quarantine in Hong Kong on the way back from Scotland.
Oh, yeah.
So I was in a hotel room for 2 weeks without leaving, and that's just where I was like basically having Michael Saylor podcast pump into my veins and selling everything I owned and buying Bitcoin. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, the quarantine accelerated your Bitcoin.
Literally,
that is awesome.
Yeah, literally, COVID was what orange pilled me, because I was in that hotel room for 2 weeks. I was like maxing out, because I bought, like, the business started doing, we started being able to take cash out of the business within like 4 or 5 months. And it was like more money than I had made before. And I was like, and it was just me and my wife. We're single. So it was like, okay, I need to invest this money again. I haven't saved or invested money in like, God knows how long. Well, I saved some money when I was a broker, but then I spent it all like when I started my brokerage. But anyway,
Right.
So I was like investing and buying, I was stock picking as well. And it was like April 2020 when everything was just going stratospheric. So I was like, I bought Tesla, I bought Square before they announced their Bitcoin buy. I bought Spotify before they announced the Joe Rogan deal. It's like everything you touch just
Zoom.
Like,
did you hit Zoom?
No, I didn't hit Zoom. I think Zoom was already like insanely high. And I was like,
that's probably right.
It's a video. It's just like Google Meet, but
yeah.
No, I didn't hit Zoom, but it was mainly like Tesla, Square, and Spotify are the main ones I remember. I think I owned Virgin Galactic, but I sold. Yeah, anyway, I then had started buying some Bitcoin in like August. I remember being on Binance trying to buy 0.4 of a Bitcoin, but I didn't know how to like send money to Binance. So I was buying everything with like through my credit card on
Mm,
Binance, and for some reason it kept rejecting my credit card, and then I was like, okay, forget it. And this was like at 12K or something, right?
yeah.
But then
Yeah.
in November I finally figured out how to move money and buy more Bitcoin and whatever. So I was selling everything that I owned. I think I kept Square as the very last thing I sold because it was still sort of Bitcoin correlated. But at some point I was like,
Hmm.
okay, just Bitcoin makes more sense than Square.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Man,
since
we've
then it's
had
just
very
been
similar.
only Bitcoin.
We've had very similar journeys.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I want to talk about Bitcoin, but I wanted to ask you a couple things about like owning a business
Mm-hmm.
first. So I've got this theory because I've always worked on the internet, like primarily online marketing is what I've done, consulting through the internet, all that sort of stuff. Um, and so you've done the normal offline business where you have to meet with people in person and run a business. And then now you've done the internet thing. And it always feels like people that are on the internet are intrigued at starting an offline business. At least I am, and friends I talk to that work on the internet, because it's like, wait, if you own a laundromat, you know you only have two competitors and you just have to be better than those two competitors. Can you do that? You've got a business. So that's compelling. And then people that own an offline business talk to me and they're like, you just sit at home on your computer all day? That sounds amazing, right? It's the grass is always greener on the
Yeah.
other side. So I'm curious, since you've done both, what's compelling about each and what is a drawback of each model?
I mean, I think in the example you gave, like if you're in a laundromat, presumably you're not going to like empty the machines and clean them and whatever. So I guess it depends what kind of online business and what kind of offline business you own.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that just generally with an offline business, you just require more physical stuff, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
like some sort of machinery or it's people. It requires a lot more capital. It's requires a lot more of all those things to even scale it. Whereas with an online business, depending on what you do, uh, you could just scale it far, far, far bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it also depends. Like, do you have the desire to be able to to move to different places, travel and work? Uh, if you're happy in your hometown, maybe you don't mind having an offline business that's keeping you
Right.
geographically constrained. For me, I was like, not only do I not like the having to scale a business through with people, but if for some reason I ever want to leave Hong Kong, like things, the whole China thing was happening with Hong Kong. I was like,
Yeah.
it started making me think like I'm 100% in Hong Kong, and if something goes wrong here or I want to leave,
Yeah.
I don't want to be 40 and be like, oh, I'm leaving the only thing I know how to do, which is there's some transferable skills, but your market knowledge is a huge part of you being a good broker. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I could go to another city, but then I have to learn the market all over again.
Yep.
So I was kind of like, I want to move somewhere where it doesn't matter if I leave there, I can still do the same thing with the same clients and the same knowledge, and I can do it from anywhere. And I don't mind. I'm not the kind of person like I don't necessarily. It was nice to have a business where you didn't have to be involved day to day, but that's primarily because I wasn't learning anymore, so I wanted to. Yeah, I wasn't enjoying that. I do like to do new. Part of the like appeal of doing something new is that you have a new challenge. You learn
Mm-hmm.
something new. Um, but yeah, I would say those are the main differences. Like if you don't want to scale with a lot of capital, a lot of physical stuff, or a lot of people, then the online business thing is better. And you alluded before that perhaps like if you have an offline business, especially a local business, you know who your competitors are, and as long as you beat them. But I think you can make actually the sort of the community I run. Well, it is like a consulting community, but the whole premise of that is using your personal brand to make your business a monopoly, and that applies
Mm-hmm.
to online businesses as well,
Yeah.
right? If it doesn't matter
Yep.
what business you have, if you are building a personal brand and attaching that to the business, then in some form or another, people are buying you, not just the service or the product that you sell, right? They're
Right.
buying your values, your beliefs, like they're similar to you. Like we like to work with people who are similar to us. And so you can find your own little tribe of clients, of people who will buy from you just based on the fact that you're very similar to them, or, they like what you have to say, or they like the way you think, or they like what the values that you bring to the table, right? Because ultimately, like, a marketing consultant, like, there's probably 10 bajillion of those on the internet, right? But then when you like a Bitcoiner marketing consultant that is like, appreciates the sovereignty that being geographically mobile brings, and, has all these other, doesn't, he wants to build a business that it's just maybe him and one other, a VA or something like that, that resonates with that person. And so they want to work with you on their marketing business.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to, so I mean, this is what you do now, is help people build personal brands. So you're saying kind of at the core of doing that is finding something specific enough that you're like the only one in the world who does it. Is that how you view it?
No, just putting yourself in the mix along with whatever service you offer, right? So I think, like, when people are buying coaching, or like my business is coaching, consulting, right? So I focus on that. You can say that people are buying you as much as they're buying the coaching and consulting that you offer, right?
Yeah.
For example, when I've worked with a few personal trainers before, and there's just some, they're all going to teach me the same thing. Like, it's science, right? You eat less calories and you lift and whatever, right? Yeah. But I'm more likely to do it for a coach that, like, I like this guy, I want to do well. I feel a connection to him, versus some other guy where, like, I don't connect with him at all. For some reason, there's just not like I hate to use the word the vibe, but, like, there's not a vibe. There's not a connection. I don't feel connected to him, right? But there's another coach that I feel really connected to. And so I'm more likely to listen to what he's going to say to me, to adhere to the advice he gives me, and also to just kind of, like, as a people-pleasing thing, to, like, do well, be a good student, let's say.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that's just based on that person. I'm literally buying that person. I'm not buying the information he gives me, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's the same, but it's the same with it doesn't even have to be like a service. It can be a physical product. Like, how many people who are Bitcoiners start something Bitcoin business, like meat, like Bitcoin meat, Bitcoin coffee cups, Bitcoin pins, Bitcoin 3D printing, right? And people buy from them because, like, this guy shares some value with me, like these Bitcoin values, or we both like Bitcoin, and so I want to buy from him rather than the random guy who just makes rings and doesn't, there's nothing else attached to that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a combining of, you can see it as like combining two different things that puts you in that decreases the size of it decreases your competition. It's also potentially a smaller market. Well, usually when you are doing this, you are creating, you're going after a smaller target market. But if you're selling high ticket stuff, like if you're selling consulting, right, you don't need hundreds of thousands of clients or millions of clients. That's mass market stuff. That's like startups who need to, like, capture the entire market and be the winners. Like, you as a consultant maybe just need 50 clients in a year, or 20 clients. Depends how much you charge and how, the lifestyle you want to live and how hard you want to work.
Right. Yep. You had a Bitcoin Gandalf, so you were sort of pseudonymous on Twitter, and you had this You Are the Monopoly brand going as well, right? And did you essentially merge those two?
No, I used to work. So when after the real estate stuff and moving to Scotland, actually I was in Hong Kong for 6 months. That's when I was just kind of consuming Bitcoin content, and I made this Bitcoin Gandalf account. Yeah. Number one, because I had a Twitter account in my own name, but I was kind of in the real estate Twitter space, and I didn't just want to suddenly start tweeting about Bitcoin. And secondly, I didn't want my business partner to know I gotten into Bitcoin and somehow think that I was, like, super rich or whatever.
Yeah, gotcha.
Because there was going to be potentially a legal dispute. So the less your enemy knows about you, the better. So I just remember when I was researching Bitcoin in 2017, I remember joining Twitter and following, like, I just, like, started trying to find people in the crypto space. And I remember following Kobe. I don't know if you're familiar with Kobe.
No.
His handle used to be Crypto Cobain. Now it's just at Kobe, because he's
okay.
Twitter. He's a guy on Twitter who's been around in the space since like
Yeah.
2012 or something, and he's gotten mega rich just by sticking around. And I think he's done trading and whatever. Anyway, I just remember he for some reason he stuck out to me, and so when I was like figuring out, when I was like, okay, I want to tweet about Bitcoin, because I started following everyone in the Bitcoin space from the other account. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do what he did, which is like, just put crypto, but not. I was like, I'm Bitcoin only, so I'm putting Bitcoin and then just some like either famous, real or mythical, fictional character, and I liked Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, and so I used him, and that's how it came about. It wasn't like, it was literally just to kind of like make sure to stay private from my business partner, and also because I was already in real estate Twitter with my real handle, and then that's when I started discovering the whole thing about privacy and going down the libertarian rabbit hole and other stuff. And then I was like, at one point, going super cypherpunk, and I was like, I don't want anyone to know who I am, and I would dress up as Gandalf during podcasts and stuff. And then eventually I got a job at Brains, the Bitcoin mining company.
Yeah.
Literally an internship. I was like, I'm spending all my time on Twitter anyway, and I want to get I'd love, Bitcoin was a thing where I was like, I could work on the internet on something that I could do from anywhere in the world. So, and this Twitter thing's going well. I think I'd like grown the account to like 3,000 followers or something in 4 or 5, 6 months or whatever. Anyway, so I took this job at this internship at Brains, managing their social media, and that eventually started taking me to conferences, and the role grew. And by the end of it, it was like me and the chief. He's called the chief of propaganda, but essentially the chief marketing officer. It's just me and him basically running the entire marketing team. There's some design folks as well, but the like copywriting and stuff is just me and him. And yeah, Twitter, obviously, like my Twitter had taken off, and I was really enjoying writing online as a medium. So I decided to just, I was like, I'm ready to go do something on my own. I'm the kind of person I'm not good at like side hustling. I'm like, I know that I want to do something. I know I can figure it out, but I need the time to do it. Right. I go all in. So I told him I was going to leave. I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I knew it was going to be something to do with writing and something, I was going to double down on tweeting and writing and figure it out. So I actually started writing threads like about crazy historical Bitcoin stories, and at one point I thought I would write like books about that, but I was like, that's not a great way to make money. Still happy to write books, just not for money. So people started asking. I got a few requests from people to ghostwrite for them. Like, I want to grow my Twitter. Can you help me? Yeah. And I was kind of like, agency. I don't want to start an agency because an agency requires lots of people. And that's like completely the opposite of what I want to do. And I want to write for myself. But eventually I was like, okay, like it's a signal from the universe. Maybe I should do a little bit of that. And then I stumbled upon like a consulting business model as well. Just for some reason, consulting had never come across it was like either agency or it has to be like some sort of very scalable media thing, but consulting never kind of crossed my mind for some reason. But I came across like other people doing sort of marketing consulting stuff on the internet, and I was like, okay, I can take this personal branding thing and do consulting for it, which is a lot more scalable than ghostwriting.
Yep.
And then here we are.
Yeah.
So You Are the Monopoly I only came up with that in September, October, November last year, not that long ago.
Oh,
yeah,
gotcha.
I was already ghostwriting.
Yep.
And then trying to figure out what else to do alongside that.
Yeah. So let's talk about some Bitcoin stuff here, because I want to ask you two things, because at the same time, because they may be similar. What clicked for you when you finally got Bitcoin? What was it that clicked? And then secondly, if you were to explain it to like a family member or something, or when you have, how do you explain Bitcoin in a couple of minutes?
So the analogy that got me, that I remember, it just like clicked in my head. Because when I bought Bitcoin in 2019, I didn't really know, I probably knew like cryptocurrency and whatever. The analogy that really got it for me was that it was a network of money. It was like Michael Saylor said something like, Facebook is a social network, and Bitcoin is a money network, right? It's like Facebook, so it has all the network effects of like a Facebook or something else that has network effects, but it has a inbuilt money, and by owning that money, you can own essentially like a piece of the network, right? And the fact that there's no management, there's no people that can fuck things up. It's decentralized. No one can change it. It's got all these qualities that make it great money. I think you have to understand somewhat what money is to get Bitcoin the asset. But for me, it clicked as a network thing first. Like it's going to be adopted. Everyone's going to use it because why not? It's one currency versus, it's like, imagine, I guess, if every country had its own type of mobile phone, and they couldn't call each other or text message each other, right? No, everyone just uses Apple or Android, right? Phones, and they can all pretty much interact, communicate with each other. But with money, we don't have that, and so that was also quite like an appealing thing, is to have one global universal money that we can all use, and it's on a network that no one can control. And then when you understand like central banking and how they could just print money, and that the fact that no one can do that on Bitcoin, it's big, but it's very hard to explain it in 2 or 3 minutes to anyone, I think. I don't think people are, especially if they don't understand what money is, which most people don't. So I think it requires some base level of understanding of like what is money.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly, when I first got into Bitcoin, like I thought, money is just what we all believe is money. Like we all agree that this is money, so it's money, but it's actually not that, right? Good money does have some characteristics that make it good money. It's not just because we all suddenly arbitrarily decided that like fiat is good money or that shells were good money or whatever. They had some qualities that made them useful as money.
Yeah.
You could almost say like it made them like that. That's what gives the qualities is what gives money its utility. Right? Because if it doesn't have utility as money, you can't use it as money. Right? If your money is like something that rots after 2 days, not good money.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so that part right there is what people actually do understand, even if they don't understand money. They understand that the money is just eroding, and they might not even put it that way, but they might just say, man, I keep saving and I keep trying to get to a target for a down payment on a house, and houses keep getting more and more expensive. I mean, what they're realizing is the money's losing value as measuring the houses. And they understand that their grocery bills are way up and not as much up as their salaries, right, over the last few years. So people do inherently understand that because they're transacting in it and they're seeing it lose value. So that's usually where it is for me. It's basically what's causing that to happen, right? Why is every house cost 35% more than 5 years ago? How is that possible? That when I talk to people, it seems to resonate that way, that you're trying to make it click, like why everything's going away from them faster than their salary can catch up.
No, man, it's Putin's fault.
Yeah.
It's Putin's fault, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the supply.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
COVID supply shock.
Oh man, seriously. Yeah, exactly. So you have written some of these awesome threads, and are you still writing a book right now?
Yes, but I haven't done any work on it in like 2 months. I smashed out like 18,000 words for it.
Wow.
And then it's been stalled. I'm still sort of finding. So I launched the consulting community January 6th, actually. So I'm still finding like my feet in terms of how much time and work that requires, and writing the book. And then I have a couple of like my ghostwriting business is growing a little bit. So I have a few ghostwriting clients and a consulting client outside of the community as well. So I'm just trying to balance everything. I'm also on a bit of a fitness health kick as well. So just trying to find time for all those things. Obviously the book is like the least financially rewarding at the moment. So it takes a backseat, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely.
It's also the thing that requires the most like time. You need to block out to write a book. I can't just sit down and write for 5 minutes on the book. It has to be like
No.
4 hours or nothing. And so it's very hard to find a 4-hour block of time to undistracted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the general premise of the book?
So when I was doing
story?
when I was doing this crazy historical Bitcoin stories, I was like, right, I'm just gonna make a book of 21 crazy, like short, basically turn the threads into short stories and turn the short stories into either one book or a series of books, right? And so I was like, I've written however many threads I want to do. It's going to be 21 short stories, right?
Yeah.
So looking, just, I was thinking about stuff that I knew about that I hadn't written about yet. And one of the things that I remember back before I was in Bitcoin, but that I'd heard about was these like Swiss bunkers, Zappo Bank, that had these like Swiss bunkers where, hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin were being stored in these military bunkers in Switzerland. And so I started looking at that, and there's like, oh, who's the founder of Zappo Bank? Oh, it's this guy called Wences Casares. And then I was like, oh, I've heard people like sort of mention him before on Twitter, but he's not really around anymore. And I remember this one tweet I read that stuck with me that was like, Wences Casares is the biggest Bitcoin holder, bigger than Satoshi, right? And I was from someone, and I was like, this is crazy. So then I start, Googling Wences Casares and listening to podcasts and watching videos. And I'm like, this is the most interesting guy that nobody knows about in the entire world. And I just became like, I became obsessed with his story and like just listening to everything that he'd ever done and just trying to piece together his like incredible business story. Because I don't know if you know it, if you're familiar with it, but the guy...
Yeah, I would love you to tell it. I've thought I'd read as much as I possibly could about Bitcoin until seeing some of your stuff on it.
He is like
listening to you talk about it.
Yeah, he's Michael Saylor before there was Michael Saylor.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think about how many people Michael Saylor's... he did the Michael Saylor thing, but one-on-one combat with people that he knew, right? Not a lot of media, not a lot of there wasn't, I guess, podcasts when he was like actively still around. Podcasts weren't a big thing then. So he orange pilled like billionaires and from Silicon Valley and Wall Street. So many people who bought Bitcoin in 2013 will tell you that Wences Casares was the guy who told them about Bitcoin. And so Wences Casares he grew up as a sheep rancher's son in Patagonia, which is like the Argentinian desert, middle of nowhere, south of Argentina. So he grew up on a sheep ranch. Like his I can't get into all the details because it's just it's too much. But he grew up isolated in the middle of nowhere. He went to a university in Buenos Aires. He did an exchange program to the U.S. and that's where he was like, oh my god, the U.S. is amazing. Anyway, he went to university in Buenos Aires, attended a conference where they had a computer connected to the internet. This is in like 1991. So he like got to play with the internet for the first time, and he was like, this is incredible. Like, I want to be involved. His dad used to make ham radios. He was a ham radio enthusiast. So he used to make radios so they could listen to news and stuff on the ranch because they didn't even have electricity. So everything was like generator based. And so he'd make these ham radios and they would use them to communicate with other people in other ranches and to listen to like news and just like know what's going on in the outside world. So his dad was quite techie and his mum was sort of entrepreneurial. She took the wool from the sheep on the ranch and she would make sweaters with it, and Wences would go with her to like the big towns and they would sell the sweaters there. He got like the entrepreneurial streak from his mum, the techie thing from his dad, and so when he saw the internet for the first time, he was like, this is incredible. And also he watched his parents lose their life savings 3 times in Argentina because of all the currency devaluations, capital controls, etc. Right? So he was like, I need to get other people to experience the internet. So that led him to basically, he asked the people at this booth, like, how do I get internet? It's like, oh, it's not out yet, but you have to like order a commercial line and maybe you'll get it and whatever. So he fills out this form to try and get a line. And he ends up starting Argentina's first internet service provider. This like a few years in, he gets basically rugged by his investor. Just completely ousted from the company. There's details, but I won't get it. But yeah, he gets rugged by his investor and is left with nothing. So he's gone from like poor kid, young, to being potentially like multi-millionaire, maybe decamillionaire, to zero again.
Yeah.
But doesn't he's still like, this internet thing's amazing, and he goes and starts Latin America's first online brokerage in 1997, and he ends up selling that to Banco Santander in the year 2000, just before the dot-com crash, for $750 million.
Wow.
So that's where I think that's where he makes the bulk of his wealth until
Yeah.
he's also thinking like the internet is going to fix the issues that caused his parents to lose all their money, because he was like, the reason they lost everything was because they didn't have access to buy assets like a house, or well, obviously they had the ranch, but like they couldn't buy into real estate, or they couldn't buy into stocks. So he thought the internet would democratize access to assets, and then people would be able to own assets, and you wouldn't be able to get rugged when governments devalue your currency. But he was like, he started like an online bank in Brazil, and then he like tried to start basically like an Apple wallet before Apple Pay, and the wallet, he made an app where you could put your card on your iPhone and whatever. But he started to become disillusioned with like, he was like, the internet's been around for however many 20 years at this point, and I still haven't figured out a way to like give everyone access to banking and assets. So he's going to retire, and every year he goes on a trip with his mates around Argentina. They own this big yellow school bus that they all hop on and travel around. They do a road trip on it. And this particular year, he's in the US, and his mates are like, Wences, the bus needs some repairs, so we need you to send us your share of the repairs, like $2,000. And there's capital controls at the time, so in order to get money into Argentina, you had to like send it to the central bank, and then the central bank would choose the conversion rate at which they would convert your dollars into pesos, and then it was like very complicated, required paperwork, and he was like, I don't want to deal with that. And then one of his mates, who was not techie or finance savvy at all, says, Wences, I've heard about this thing called Bitcoin. Why don't you look into that so you can use Bitcoin to send us the money? And so Wences is like, okay, I'm a fintech entrepreneur. I've had like almost $1 billion exit. I haven't heard about Bitcoin, and this guy who knows nothing is talking about it. It must be a scam. But he looks into it, and yeah, he's like, yeah, this seems like a scam, but screw it. I'll have no better options. I'll give it a shot. So he finds a guy on Craigslist who is selling some Bitcoin, and arranges to meet him in like in a cafe in Palo Alto in San Fran. And he hands the guy over the $2,000, and the guy makes him download a Bitcoin wallet and scan his QR code and takes his money and leaves and says, yep, you've got the Bitcoin now. And Wences is like convinced he's just been scammed out of $2,000, but he does what his friend tells him and sends the Bitcoin over. And like a couple of hours later, his mate calls him and says, like, I got the money, I got the Bitcoin, turned it into pesos, and your share of the repairs is good. And then Wences is like, whoa, what just happened? So that's when he starts to take it seriously. And he actually ends up hiring hackers to try and hack Bitcoin. He pays them like, I can't remember it's like six figures, 150, 250 grand to spend 3 months trying to hack Bitcoin just as a way for him to test whether this thing is like real and robust. And the hackers come back to him after 3 months, and they're like, yeah, we couldn't hack Bitcoin yet, but we think we can, but we need more time. So, we need another 3 months and another 150 grand, but we want to get paid in Bitcoin. And that's when he's like, okay, shit, this thing is real. And then he ends up, he's probably worth God knows how much money, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, depending on how many partners and stuff he had in the businesses because he sold his online Brazilian bank that sold as well for an undisclosed amount. Or 40 million. Anyway, tens of millions, a few exits. The guy's worth at least tens of millions, if not 100 million. And he discovers Bitcoin in 2012 when it's like $3. And he goes basically like, he's like, I own an irresponsible amount of Bitcoin at like, $100. Man. And I don't know if you've seen the Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin piece about, I can't remember the title of it, but it goes into, and it talks about Endeavor and how, basically it gets into there's this organization, nonprofit called Endeavor, which is like to try and help Latin American entrepreneurs get access to capital and start businesses and stuff. And that's how Wences got some he basically got help from them when he started the Latin American online brokerage. Like I think they introduced him to someone who became the CTO, and they just gave him some guidance on like general business, how to start a company, and all that stuff. So the Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin piece talks about Wences and Zappo Bank, and because it's connected to Endeavor, and in that they show the address that's rumored to be Wences's Bitcoin wallet, and it has 917,000 Bitcoin in it or something. Yeah.
Wow.
I think Zappo has like 30,000 Bitcoin just on its own. So people don't know this, but Zappo was the biggest custodian of Bitcoin in the world back in like 2015 until so Coinbase Custody launched in 2018 or something, and they bought Zappo's institutional custody business off them. So that's how they ended up with like the Grayscale Bitcoin was stored at Zappo Bank before that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Anyway, that's the story. And then he after they sold the institutional part of the business to Coinbase, he deleted his Twitter and is basically sort of not MIA. He's still around, but he's just not public.
Yeah. Have you tried to get in touch with him about the book?
Not yet, but I am going to. I wanted to have something that I could show him. I don't just want to be a random guy on the internet. It's like, I'm going to write a book about you. It's like, sure, buddy. Yeah, like, I want to have some proof of work to show him so that hopefully he'll collaborate in some form of let me interview him or whatever. He might say no.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So basically, the book is, so then there was like I was like, there has to be a biography about this guy. That was the first idea I had. But that's like a great idea. That's a hefty undertaking. So I was like, how can I take a sliver of something still related to him and do it so I can do a quick first book before I do the biography, which is like maybe a multi-year project, especially if he agreed to collaborate and whatever. So I was like, well, he convinced so many people to buy Bitcoin. Why don't I try and find out what it is about the way he explained Bitcoin that was so compelling to people and then put that in a book? Yeah. Sort of I don't know if you're familiar with the Almanac of Naval Ravikant.
Yep.
Yeah, so like that, but for like his lessons on Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that's going to be the first book.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Good for you. I hope you find the 4-hour blocks of time so I can read it when it's done.
Nice. Thank you. I will. I will find it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you one last question. So where do you think Bitcoin goes from here? It's 2025. You could say, what is it doing for the world in 2030 and 2035 and 2040? Kind of what's the path you lay out for yourself for Bitcoin?
As much as I would love for everyone to, for the world to be living on a Bitcoin standard and everyone to be using Bitcoin and things to be priced in Bitcoin and for no fiat currencies to exist, I used to maybe believe that was a possibility, but I not zero chance, but I give that a very, very, very slim chance. But I do think that Bitcoin, just by looking at, just looking at the signal from the market, from people who buy Bitcoin, why they buy it, right? And everyone's buying it for number go up. They're buying as an investment to increase their purchasing power, protect their purchasing power, right? So it competes with the S&P 500. It competes with real estate. It competes with whatever other investments you might make, So I do think that there's a place where Bitcoin could become like the S&P 500 index fund version of investing. So instead of like, you have people now like, I put this much away in an S&P 500 index fund. In 30 years, I'll have this many millions and I'll be able to retire. I do think that Bitcoin can become a huge challenge to that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, to real estate too, to some extent. I think real estate's even more deeply ingrained in the culture that like, getting on the property ladder and owning your home is like a sort of, it's almost a status symbol. It's like, oh, you guys don't own your house, you rent? Like, yeah, right. So I think it's harder for it to chip away as much at that. I do think it will chip away at people who invest in real estate, because it's just like, you could do all this work on the real estate side to make 13, if you have an amazing annual return, maybe like 10% or over, right?
Yeah.
Or you could just buy Bitcoin and sit on your ass and do nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It is literally, I can't remember who was saying this the other day. Maybe it was the Jack Malice clip I saw, but it's like, you'd do better buying some Bitcoin going to sleep for 4 years and waking up, and you'd be richer than almost anything you can do yourself to make money,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, I think that's definitely. So one of my personal goals is, in order to be able to leave, I was all in on Bitcoin, right? So in order to be able to leave my job at Brains and move to Dubai, I've moved 3 times in 3 years. Like, no company's been moving me and my family. It's just me, right? I pay for it. So I've moved 3 times in 3 years. I basically went from, like, 10-year career to intern. So I've had to sell Bitcoin. And my personal challenge is, I've done it because I believe I can make, I believe with the consulting stuff, I can scale it and make back the money in Bitcoin terms, and then have a business that makes great income and have all my Bitcoin back and be able to buy more Bitcoin. That's my personal challenge. Even though, it is very hard to do. I've seen the path. Like, the only thing, for example, buying the real estate business was, the return was insane. Like, if you can find the right business and scale it, the returns are amazing. That's not to say that that's not to say that for Bitcoin it isn't, but for Bitcoin you need to have money to buy the Bitcoin. Whereas this business, you can start it with time. You can invest time into it, right? You can't invest.
Yes.
You can invest time to buy Bitcoin, but, like, it's not like I'm going to spend 5 minutes and get some Bitcoin. No, but you can spend 5 minutes working on a business that makes some income, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't have money to buy more Bitcoin, start a business that makes money, and then use that to buy Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Why don't we end right there? That's perfect closing remarks right there. Where would you want people to go? And I'll put all these down in the show notes to connect with you.
So Twitter is where Twitter is like my website, my homepage. So x.com/BTC Gandalf. If you want to go and sign up for my email list, it's youarethemonopoly.com. It's where I talk about personal branding stuff, some business stuff, a bit of everything. But that's basically where I offer my consulting services. But my Twitter is my top of funnel, let's call it.
There you go. Awesome. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for taking the time.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me.